This is why the Gospels were valid historical documents in like 2 to 3 minutes. Firstly, we have major Jewish Roman historians like Josephus and Tacitus who confirm many of the Gospel details that Jesus was a wise teacher, a miracle worker, and that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. We also have the letters of Paul written just 10 years after Jesus' resurrection, which are considered valid historical documents by scholars which affirm the resurrection account Jesus' divinity and says that there were 500 eyewitnesses to his resurrection. A highly vulnerable claim in a time where there were so many people who could fact-check this and utterly destroy the spread of Christianity once and for all, especially in such a small area like 1st century Judea where word would get around so fast that this was fake. However, it was the fastest growing faith in the world and quickly reached the major cities and civilizations before the 1st century had even ended, just through the word of mouth. Next, the Gospels are highly consistent with 1st century biographical practices and have many minor differences in detail, order, and certain descriptions, which gives evidence that they are an eyewitness testimony and not a grouped together work of elaborate fiction. Also, we have to take into account the fact that they were preserved and recognized as valid historical documents to the early church, and not a single person denied, with good evidence, the accuracy of these claims until years after all of the eyewitnesses who could have been there had died. The earliest objection to Christianity came out in the 2nd century by Greek philosopher Celsus, who wasn't even an eyewitness himself. That is the earliest we have. No wealthy or powerful Romans and Jews had come out and said anything against the resurrection claims whatsoever, and was accepted as is for the lifetimes of all the possible eyewitnesses. Nobody objected. The Gospels also list very embarrassing and odd details about how the women were the first to discover the resurrection, that all the men had ran away scared. In a society where women were looked down upon, a fictional account would likely try to paint the men as the strong and brave people who discovered the tomb, and not the women. And that Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin who ordered the crucifixion of Jesus, was the one to bury him. Very odd details if it was trying to present a fictional account. And not to mention the very detailed knowledge of local figures, geography, common names, customs, and areas within the 1st century Judean cities lend also a lot more credibility. Finally, the apostles all willingly went into the most dangerous areas and went to the most brutal of deaths on account of the gospel, which is weird that not just all 12 of them did, but thousands of the early Christian martyrs did. And according to famous Romans like Pliny the Younger, early Christians were given 3 chances to apostatize. They tripled down on the gospel, showing an absolute devotion and certainty to what they saw. It would be really odd to go to the most brutal death for something of that nature that you were even just somewhat unsure about. And that's why the Gospels are more likely than not valid historical testimonies which depict the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus.